The Place of Madness by Merlin Moore Taylor. Nonsense. A penitentiary is not intended to be a place for coddling and pampering those who have broken the law. Stevenson, chairman of the prison commission, waved a fat hand in the direction of the convict standing at the foot of the table. This man, he went on, has learned in some way that the newspapers are gunning for the warden, and he is seizing the opportunity to make a play for sympathy in his own behalf. I'll admit that these tales he tells of brutality toward the prisoners are well told, but I believe that he is stretching the facts. They can't be true. Discipline must be maintained in a place like this, even if it requires harsh measure to do it at times. "There is no call for brutality, however," exclaimed the convict, breaking the rule that prisoners must not speak unless they are spoken to. Then, ignoring the chairman's upraised hand, he went on, "We were treated like beasts here. If a man so much as opens his mouth to ask a civil and necessary question, the reply is a blow. Dropping a knife or fork or a spoon at the table is punished by going without the next meal. Men too ill to work are driven to the shops with the butts of guns. Petty infractions of the most trivial rules mean the dark cell and a diet of bread and water. Do you know what the dark cell is? Solitary, they call it here. Hell would be a better name. Steel all around you. Steel walls, steel door, steel ceiling, steel floor. Not a cot to lie upon, not even a stool to sit upon. Nothing but the bare floor. And darkness. Not a ray of light ever penetrates the dark cell once the door is closed upon you. No air comes to you except through a small ventilator in the roof, and even that has an elbow to keep the light away from you. Is it any wonder that even the most refractory prisoner comes out of there broken in mind, in body, in spirit, and some of them go insane, stark, staring mad after only a few hours of it. And for what? I spent 2 days in solitary because I collapsed from weakness at my bench in the shoe factory. See this scar?" He pointed to a livid mark over one eye. "A guard did that with the barrel of his rifle because I was unable to get up and go back to work when he told me. He knocked me senseless, and when I came to, I was in solitary. Insubordination, they called it. 2 days they kept me in there when I ought to have been in a hospital. 2 days of hell and torture because I was ill. People prate of reforming men in prison. It's the other way around. It makes confirmed criminals of them if they don't go mad first." The chairman wriggled in his seat and cleared his throat impatiently. "We have listened to you for quite a while, my man," he said pompously, "but I, for one, have enough. A dozen or more prisoners have testified here today, and none of them has made a statement to back up the charges you have made." "And why?" demanded the prisoner. "Because they are afraid to tell the truth. They know that they would be beaten and starved and deprived of their good time on one excuse or another if they even hinted at what they know. You wouldn't believe them anyhow. You don't believe me, yet I probably shall suffer for what I have said here. But that doesn't matter. They can't take any good time away from me. I'm in for life." His voice grew bitter. "And that is one reason I have gone into this thing in detail, for my sake and the sake of others who cannot look forward to ever leaving this place. The law has decreed that we shall live and die here, but the law said nothing about torturing us. This board guaranteed its protection to all who were called upon to testify here," answered the chairman. "It has no desire to whitewash any person in connection with the investigation which is being made, and in order that there might be no reflection on the manner in which this hearing is conducted, neither the warden, his deputies, nor guards have been permitted to attend. Unless you have tangible evidence to offer us and can give the names of those who can back up your charges, you may go." "Just a minute." It was the board member nearest the prisoner who interrupted. Then to the convict, You said, I believe, that only a few hours in the dark cell often will drive a man insane. Yet you spent 2 days there. You are not insane, are you? No, sir. The convict spoke respectfully. My conscience was clear, and I was able to serve my time there without breaking, but another day or so would have finished me. You testified against me at my trial, didn't you? I hold no grudge against you for that, sir. I give you credit for doing only what you thought was your duty. Your testimony clinched the case against me, yet I am innocent. The chairman rapped sharply upon the table. I utterly fail to see what all this has to do with the matter under investigation, he protested irritably. We are not trying this man's case. The courts have passed upon that. He is just like all the rest. Any one of them is ready to sweat on a stack of Bibles that he is innocent. Let's get on with this investigation. The convict bowed silently and turned toward the door beyond which the guards were waiting to conduct him back to his cell. A hand upon his arm detained him. "Mr. Chairman," said Blaylock, the member who had questioned the prisoner, "I request that this man be permitted to go on with what he was saying. I shall have no more questions to ask. You were saying," he prompted the man beside him. "I was saying that I was innocent," resumed the convict. "I was about to add that not even a man who is guiltless of wrongdoing would be able to withstand the terrors of solitary for any length of time. You, for instance, are a physician, a man of sterling reputation against whom no one ever has breathed a word. Yet I doubt that you could endure several hours in the dark cell. If you would only try it, you would know for yourself that I have spoken the truth. Gentlemen, I beg of you to do all in your power to abolish the dark cell. Men can stand just so much without cracking, and if you will dig into the facts, you will find that 9 times out of 10 it is men broken in solitary who are responsible for the outbreaks in prison. That is all." He bowed respectfully and was gone. "Clever talker, that fellow," commented the secretary of the commission, breaking the silence. "He almost had me believing him. Who is he, Blaylock? You had him summoned, I believe." The physician nodded. "I confess it was as much from personal interest in the man as from any hope that he might give valuable evidence here," he said. "He surprised me with his outburst. He is a clever talker. Ellis is his name, Martin Ellis, and he comes of a splendid and well-to-do family. University graduate and quite capable of having carved out a wonderful career. But he was idolized at home and given more money than was good for him. It made him an idler and a young ne'er-do-well. But whatever he did openly, and I never heard of anything seriously wrong until he was convicted of the crime which brought him here." "Murder, I suppose?" Stevenson, the chairman, was interested in spite of himself. He spoke of being in for life. "Yes, killing a girl. Agnes Keller was her name. Poor, but well thought of. Church worker, member of the choir, and so on. It was brought out at the trial. In fact, Ellis told it himself that he was infatuated with her, and they were together a great deal. Not openly, of course, because old man Ellis, his father, would have poured up the earth. The affair ended like all these clandestine affairs, especially if the girl is young and pretty and poor. It was the theory of the prosecution that when she discovered her condition, she became frantic and demanded that Ellis marry her, the alternative being that she would go to his father with the story. It was charged that he killed her to avoid making a choice. The evidence was purely circumstantial, but the jury held it was conclusive.
Ellis admitted on the stand that they often went riding in his motor car at night. One damning fact against him was that he was seen driving, alone and rapidly, along the country lane near where her body was found. He had nothing to back up his claim that he felt ill and went for a drive in an effort to relieve a sick headache. Of course, he denied absolutely that he was responsible for her condition, or that he even knew of it, but the jury was out less than an hour. The only hitch, I learned later, was whether to affix the death penalty or not. He said you were a witness against him. What part did you play? Asked Stevenson. An unwilling one, answered Blaylock quickly. I did not believe that Ellis was guilty then. I am not convinced of it now, but as the girl's physician, and presumably one of those to whom she would go in her trouble, I was questioned as soon as the coroner had held an autopsy. I admitted that she had confided in me, and that I had agreed that the man responsible should marry her. She did not tell me his name, but my evidence added weight to the theory that Ellis killed her to avoid marrying her. The door to the room swung open, and the warden stood on the threshold. "May I come in?" he asked. "Dinner is almost ready, and I thought I had better give you warning." He crossed to an empty chair and sat down. "We concluded the taking of evidence quite a little while ago," said the chairman. "Since then, Dr. Blaylock has been entertaining us with the story of the crime of that fellow, Martin Ellis, who was one of the witnesses. Quite unusual." "Yes, the sheriff who brought him here told me all about it," answered the warden. "He's hard to handle. Had trouble with one of the guards a while back, and we had to discipline him." 2 days in the solitary cell on bread and water, wasn't it? Asked Blaylock. He didn't have any good word for it. The warden flushed. "Few of those who taste of it do," he admitted. "Too much a matter of being left alone with your thoughts and your conscience. They'll punish you as much as anything can do. Well, suppose you take an adjournment and come on to dinner. Will you want to make the regular inspection tour of the prison?" "Oh, sure," yawned the chairman. "Undoubtedly everything is all right as usual, but if we omitted it, the newspapers would have something to howl about." He rose, and with the rest of the commission trailing them, followed the warden to the dining room. "Well, let's make the inspection and have it over with," said Stevenson when the meal was finished. "Where do we go first, warden?" "Through the shops and smaller buildings first, then the cells. That way you'll end up closest to the administration building, and you can go back into conference with the least delay." Uniformed guards stood smartly at attention as the warden piloted the commission through. Trustees ingratiatingly hovered about the party, eager to be of service. Great steel-barred doors swung open at the approach of the commission and clanged noisily behind it. The afternoon sunlight, slanting through the bars, relieved the somberness of the cell blocks and revealed them in their spick and spanness, made ready for the occasion. "Well, everything seems to be okay," said the chairman, as the party again drew near to the offices. "Anyone else got any suggestions?" "Yes, I'd like to see the dark cell," answered the secretary. "I don't recall ever visiting it, and that fellow Ellis interests me. He said it was a pocket edition of Hades. Where is it, warden?" The warden assumed a jocular air. "You'll be disappointed," he warned. "It's down in the basement, where prisoners who want to do so can yell and scream to their heart's content without disturbing anyone. A trifle dark, of course, but if to some it is hell, it is because they choose to make it so. If you really want to see it, come ahead. It's not occupied, however." He did not mention that he had seen to that. With all this uproar about the management of the prison, it wasn't safe to take chances. The commission, he had foreseen, might decide to make a real investigation. And you never could tell in just what condition a man would be after several hours in solitary. "There you are, gentlemen," he said with a flourish of the hand when a trustee had switched on the lights in the basement. "Not one dark cell, but half a dozen." He stood back as the members of the commission crowded forward and peered into the dark recesses. Over each doorway a single electric bulb shone weakly, far too weakly for the rays to penetrate into the corners. The solid, bolt-studded doors stood open, formidable, forbidding. "Any of you want to try it?" asked the warden from the background. "Sure, let Blaylock take a whirl at one of them," suggested the secretary. "His conscience ought to be clear enough not to trouble him. Go on, doctor,
Try it and let us know how it feels. I'd do it myself, but I don't dare risk my conscience." Blaylock, standing just inside the doorway of one of the cells, turned and for a moment surveyed them in silence. "Your suggestion, of course, was made in jest," he said. "But," a sudden ring came into his voice, "I am going to take you up on it." "No," as a chorus of exclamations came from the others, "my mind is quite made up. Warden, I want this as realistic as possible. You will please provide me with a suit of the regulation convict clothing." "Well, of all the blamed fools," ejaculated the chairman. Then he gave his shoulders a shrug. "Go on and get a zebra suit, Warden. I only hope this doesn't get into the papers." A trustee was dispatched for the striped suit. When it had been brought, Blaylock already had removed his outer garments amid the banter of the others. He did not deign to answer them until he had buttoned about him the prison jacket and jammed upon his head the little striped cap. "I guess I'm ready," he said then. "You gentlemen have seen fit to ridicule the experiment I am about to make, but I say to you that I am doing this in all seriousness. I do not believe that solitary is as bad as Ellis pictured it to us. I am going to find out. Warden, I will please see that conditions here are made exactly like those which surround a prisoner in this place." He whirled upon his heel and strode into a cell. "How long do you want to be left in there?" asked the warden. 15 minutes or so? Ellis declared his belief that I could not stand it for an hour or two, came the reply from the depths of the cell. "Suppose that we make it 2 hours. At the end of that time you may return and release me, but not a minute before." "Very well, number 9982, replied the warden. "You now are alone with your conscience." The heavy door clanged shut. A faint click told Blaylock that the light above the door had been snapped off. Then the sound of footsteps, growing fainter and fainter. The clang of the door leading to the basement.
Then silence. Blaylock was alone. Feeling with his hands, he made his way to a corner of the cell and sat down upon the bare, hard floor. He shut his eyes and set about concentrating his mind upon some subject other than the fact that he was a prisoner, of his own free will to be sure, but a prisoner nevertheless. He always had prided himself upon the fact that he had the ability to drive from his thoughts at will all topics but the one which he desired. Now he chose, at random, to begin preparing an outline of a lecture which he was scheduled to deliver within 2 weeks before the convention of medical men. Back home in his study, Blaylock was accustomed to stretching out at length in an easy chair, his feet upon a stool, a pillow beneath his head. Here his legs were stretched out upon the floor at right angles to his body, held bolt upright by the steel wall at his back. He sought to relieve the strain by keeping his knees in the air, but the floor offered no firm foothold, and his heels slipped. Irritated, Blaylock slid away from the corner and tried lying upon his back, his eyes staring up into the darkness above him. Immediately that position too grew irksome, and he turned over upon first one side, then the other, and finally he got upon his feet and leaned against the wall. Thus another 15 or 20 minutes passed, he judged. He found that it was impossible to concentrate his thoughts, so he resolved to let them wander. Leaning against the wall speedily proved uncomfortable, and Blaylock began to pace around and around the narrow confines of the cell. 4 paces one way, 2 at right angles, then 4, then 2. It reminded him of a big bear he once had watched in a zoo, striding back and forth behind the bars, but never very far from the door which shut him off from the outside world and freedom.
Suddenly, Blaylock discovered that he had made the circuit so many times in the darkness that he was turned around, that he did not know at which end lay the door to the cell. He began to hunt for it, feeling with his sensitive surgeon's fingers for the place where the door fitted into the wall of the cell. It annoyed him, after making 2 trips around, that he had failed to locate the door. He could tell by counting the corners as he came to them. The door fitted into its casing so well that he could not distinguish it from the grooves where the plates of the cell were joined together. Immediately, it became to him the most important thing in the world to know where lay that door. He thought of sounding the walls to see if at some point they would not give back a different sound and thus tell him what he felt he must know. It was becoming a mania with him now. So gently he began rapping with his knuckles against the steel. Here, there, in one place, then in another. Then he tried it all over with his ear, trained to detect, even without the aid of a stethoscope, the variations in the beating of a human heart, pressed close against the walls. But again he was foiled. Every spot gave forth the same hollow sound. Angered, Blaylock kicked viciously against the insensate steel. Shooting pains in his maltreated toes rewarded him, and with a growl of anguish he dropped to the floor to nurse the injured members. Then he became aware that his hands were stickily saturated, and he knew, when he discovered that his knuckles were skinned and raw, that it was his own blood. Desperately he fought to regain his self-control, in an effort to force himself to be bland and unruffled when the warden should come to release him, as Blaylock felt sure would be the case in only a few minutes at most. He caught himself listening intently for the footsteps of the warden, or some trustee or guard sent to release him. He strained his ears to catch the faraway clang which would indicate that someone was coming into the basement. But only the hissing sound of his own breath broke the tense silence. Funny, he thought, how very still things could be. It required no very big stretch of the imagination to picture himself as really a recalcitrant prisoner, slapped in solitary to ponder upon his misdeeds. Going further, he recalled a story which he had read long ago, of a man who found himself to be the only living human being, the others having been wiped out in the flicker of an eyelash by some mysterious force. Why didn't the warden come on and let him out of here? Surely the 2 hours were up, and he was getting tired of it. It would never do, however, to be caught in this frame of mind when he was released. He must emerge smiling, and ready to give the lie to that clever talker, Ellis. Once more he got up and began his circuit of the walls. He felt that he was master of himself again, and it would do no harm to try to solve the puzzle of the door that would not be found. Perhaps the warden had been delayed by some unexpected happening. Oh well, a few minutes longer wouldn't make any difference. Suppose that he were in Ellis's place, in for life. He didn't want to think of Ellis, but somehow the face of the lifer kept obtruding itself. His face and his words. What was it that Ellis had said? You, for instance, are a physician, a man of sterling reputation, against whom no one ever breathed a word, yet I doubt if you could endure several hours in the dark cell. And the warden had added that in the dark cell a man was alone with his conscience. Damn that warden! Where was he, anyhow? Blaylock began to dislike him. Perhaps there was something in those stories of brutality which the newspapers had printed, after all. Dislike for the warden began to give way to hate. Blaylock wondered if the warden and that fat, pompous little Stevenson, chairman of the commission, hadn't got their heads together and decided it would be a good joke to let him stay in there a great deal longer than he had ordered. He would show them, once he got out. He would show them that he didn't relish that kind of a joke, that he wasn't a man to be trifled with. Thus another hour passed, as he reckoned it, and his anger and passion got the best of him. He kicked the walls and hammered upon them with his clenched fists, insensible to the fact that he was injuring himself. Then came fear that he had been forgotten. Suppose that there had been an outbreak in the prison, that the convicts were in control. Would they release him? Might they not wreak their vengeance upon him in the absence of another victim? He began to call, moderately at first, and pausing often to listen for some response, then louder and louder, until he was screaming without cessation. He cursed and swore, pleaded and cajoled, threatened, sought to bribe by turns, demanding only that he be taken from this terrible place. He was dead to the fact that it was impossible for anyone to hear him, that only the reverberation of his own voice, thunderous in that narrow place, answered him. Beating down from the ceiling, thrown up from the floor, cast back into his teeth by the walls. The noise of his own making overwhelmed him, crushed him. Stark terror held him in its icy grip now. His thoughts pounded through his brain like water in a mill race. The perspiration fell from him in rivulets as he hammered and smashed at the walls. His brain was afire. He began to realize that what Ellis had said very easily could be true. Men did go mad in this place. Why, he was going mad himself. Mad from the torture his body was undergoing, mad from being alone with his own thoughts. There were more lucid moments when reason desperately sought to assert itself.
Blaylock's cries became less violent, and moaning and sobbing softly, he began all over again that endless circuit of the cell in search of the door. Failing, he raved again, and staggered from wall to wall, or leaped madly toward the ceiling, as if by some miracle escape might lie in that direction. Exhausted at last, he sank to the floor, poignantly conscious that interminable nights and days were passing over his head, and that thirst and hunger, keen and excruciating, held him in their grasp. At intervals, strength would come back to him, strength backed by indomitable willpower, strength that sent him lunging to his feet to renew his battering at the walls, his frenzied shouts, his screeches, in just one more effort to make himself heard. His knuckles were broken and bleeding, his lips cracked and swollen. His voice came out shrilly from his dry and racked throat. His body and legs were succumbing to a great weariness that would not be denied. Came the time at last when his own voice no longer dinned into his ears, when his legs refused to obey the will that commanded them to hoist him upon his feet, when he no longer could lift his hands. His spirit was broken at last, and he gave up the struggle and sank back upon the floor, and all around him the darkness shut down, the darkness and the silence. Then the door was thrown open, and framed in silhouette against the light beyond stood the warden. "Got enough, Doctor?" he called out cheerily. "Your 2 hours are up. Why don't you answer me? Dr. Blaylock, what's wrong, man?" He peered into the cell in a vain endeavor to force his eyes to penetrate the darkness. Failing, he fumbled in his clothes for a match, and with hands that shook, scratched it against the door. Then his face went white as a sheet. He staggered where he stood, and the match burned down to the flesh of his hands and scorched it. For in the far corner he had perceived, flat on its back, a haggard, blood-stained, white-haired thing that winked and blinked at him with vacant eyes and muttered and gibbered incoherently. Reason came back to Blaylock one day, many weeks later. He opened his eyes with the light of understanding in them, and they told him from his surroundings that he was in a hospital. Outside, the sun was shining brightly, and in a little park just beyond, birds were singing, and the breeze brought him the sound of children at play. "Awake at last, are you?
asked the white-capped nurse who came into the room just then. "Yes," said Blaylock, in a rasping whisper. He did not know it then, but the calm, soothing voice he once had boasted was his best asset in a sick room was gone forever. The terrific strain to which he had put his vocal cords in his paroxysms in the dark cell had shattered them. "You are doing splendidly," the nurse assured him brightly. "You have been seriously ill, but you are recovering rapidly now." "No," said Blaylock positively, as one who knows. "I shall never get well. Give me a mirror, please." "I don't believe there is one handy," she evaded, loath to let him see the havoc in his face. But he insisted. "Please," he begged, "I am prepared, and I do not think I will be overcome. I will be brave." Reluctantly then, she started to place the silvered glass in his hand. As he reached out to take it, he stopped, halfway.
The hand he was accustomed to see, with its tapering fingers and well-kept nails, the hand that so deftly had performed delicate operations, was gone. Instead was a slim, claw-like thing with distorted knuckles and joints. Blaylock finally extended it, took the mirror, and slowly but steadily brought it into line with his eyes. He had expected some changes, but not the sight that greeted him. The black, wavy hair had given place to locks of snowy white. His face was drawn and wrinkled, and lackluster eyes stared back at him from cavernous sockets. Long he gazed at this apparition. Then, silently, he let the mirror fall upon the cover and closed his eyes. "Don't take it so hard, Doctor," begged the nurse. "You have been through a harrowing experience, and your face shows it now. But in a short time—" The lie did not come easily, and her tongue faltered. "Never mind that," whispered Blaylock. "It doesn't matter now. Send for Stevenson, please." The chairman of the prison commission came without delay. Compelling himself to conceal the repulsion he felt at sight of the broken man upon the bed, he bustled in with forced pleasantries. "Stevenson," said Blaylock, when finally the other had taken a chair and the nurse had withdrawn, "I have something to tell you. That day I went into the dark cell." Now, old man," soothed Stevenson, laying a restraining hand upon the other's arm. "Don't let's talk about that. We abolished it that very day. Why bring up that awful experience of yours? No one knows about it but the commission, the warden, and your doctor and nurse here. We all are pledged not to talk about it, and the newspapers didn't have a line except that you were taken ill. Let the past take care of itself, Blaylock, old man, and let us talk of other things." A flash of the old willpower shone in the sick man's eyes. "No," he said firmly. "No, Stevenson. The past cannot take care of itself." "Bend closer, Stevenson. I must tell you something, and it seems I'm not strong enough yet to talk out loud. That day I so boastfully demanded that I be locked up in solitary. I thought I knew myself and my willpower. I believed that I had such control over my mind and my body that I could defy any torture man might devise without quailing, despite the knowledge that my conscience was not the lily-white thing I had led others to believe it was. For, Stevenson, my conscience was black as hell. It held the knowledge of a great sin on my part, a huge wrong that had been done another. But I had stifled it with my willpower until I believed it a thing that was dead, that it could never throw off the bondage to which I had doomed it and arise and accuse me. It was to prove that I was superior to it that I deliberately chose to be locked up with it, where, alone with my thoughts, I could prove myself the master, once for all.
for Martin Ellis had shaken my confidence, where before I had been certain, I was doubtful. I wanted to prove him a liar, and at the same time satisfy myself that I was a free man, and not the galley slave of that thing which we call a guilty conscience. In that cell, that conscience which I believed I had killed rose up to show me it had been but sleeping. Under other conditions it might have slept on indefinitely. In there, it overwhelmed me with a sense of its power, and made me feel that I was about to meet my God without even so much as a veil behind which to hide my guilty thoughts. No matter which way I turned, I saw an accusing finger pointing at me out of the darkness, and the solitude was shattered by a voice which cried out that those who sin must pay, and pay, until the slate is wiped clean. And I had sinned, but I had not paid. Conscience is a terrible thing once it is aroused, Stevenson. It is living, vibrant, and it lashes and scourges until it has exacted its toll. That was what it did to me there in the darkness, alone and at its mercy, and with no chance to escape. And in my agony and fear, I cursed the God who had created me and saddled me with this thing. I learned my lesson, though, before I was through. I, who had presumed to place my own puny will above the great eternal will, I, who had dared to believe that the great order of things, the plan by which we all must live and die, must make an exception of me, learned that I was wrong. Martin Ellis is innocent, Stevenson, and I trust to you to see that justice is done. He did not kill Agnes Keller, and I knew it, and I stood by and let him be convicted. More, I took the stand against him and helped make that conviction certain. I told only the truth in my testimony, but I did not tell all I knew, and what I omitted would have saved Ellis. I did not want to testify at all, but the prosecution refused to let me take advantage of the confidential relation which is supposed to exist between physician and patient. The state was right in its theory that the man who strangled Agnes Keller did so because he was responsible for her condition and did not wish to marry her. She came to me in my study on the night she met her death and told me she had discovered she was about to become a mother. She refused to take any steps I suggested, and she said that her child, when it was born, must have the legal right to bear the name of its father. And that very night she was lured into an automobile with the promise that the man who was to blame would take her to a nearby town and make her his wife. But on that lonely country road he turned upon her and killed her with his bare hands. And how do I know these things? Because, Stevenson, I was the man responsible for her condition, and it was I who killed her. The Ghost Guard by Bryan Irvine. If every one of the 60 guards and officials at the Granite River Prison had been asked for the name of the most popular guard on the force, there would have been 60 answers: Asa Shaw's. If each of the 1,500 convicts in the prison had been asked which guard was most disliked by the convicts, 1,500 answers would have been the same: Asa Shaw's. If some curious person had asked of each convict and each guard who is considered the most desperate, the hardest, the shrewdest criminal in the prison, the answer would have been unanimous: Malcolm Halsey, the lifer. True, it does not seem reasonable that Asa Shaw's should be liked by every guard and official and disliked by every convict. To those not familiar with the duties of prison guards, it would seem that Asa Shaw's method of handling the convicts, if disapproved of by 1,500 convicts, would surely be disapproved of by at least one of the 60 guards. But the explanation is simple. Asa Shaw's great-great-grandfather had followed the prisons as mariners follow the seas. Then Asa's grandfather took up the work and followed it with an iron hand and inflexible will, until one day a cell-made knife in the hands of a long-time con entered his back at a point where his suspenders crossed, deviating enough to the left to pierce his heart. Came next Asa Shaw's father, who went down in attempting to quell the famous Stromberg break of 1895. Asa, therefore, his prison methods impelled perhaps by heredity, looked upon every wearer of grey behind the walls as a convict, nothing more, nothing less. He neither abused nor favoured any convict. A one-year man was to Asa a convict, and no better than the man who was serving a life sentence. The crime for which any convict was sent up was of little moment to Asa. Neither did he bother about who among the inmates were considered desperate. The fact that a man wore prison grey was sufficient, whether he be a 6-month sneak thief or a 99-year murderer. When Asa shot and killed Richard Mutt Allison, when the latter attempted to escape, the warden had said, "There was really no need of killing that half-witted short-termer, Asa. He was doing only a year and was perfectly harmless. A shot in the leg or foot would have been better." And Asa's reply had been, "I had no idea who the man was, though I have seen him dozens of times, and I did not know how long he was doing, but I would have made no difference if I had known. He was a convict, sir, and he was attempting to escape. If he was only half-witted, as you say, he should have been in the insane asylum, not in the penitentiary." So that was that. If Asa ever gave a convict a smile, it had never been recorded. It is a known fact that he was never seen to frown upon a convict. He was, in short, the smileless, unyielding personification of duty, and every convict hated him for what he was. When Asa shot, he shot to kill, and he never missed. 4 little white crosses on the bleak hillside near the prison proclaimed his flawless marksmanship.
Why was this big, sandy-haired, steel-blue-eyed, middle-aged Asa Shaw's liked by his brother guards? There were many reasons why. It was as if Asa's unnatural, cold, vigilant, unfeeling attitude toward the convicts was offset each day when he came off duty by a healthy, wholesome desire to drop duty as a workhorse sheds an irritating harness. He was the life of the guards' quarters, a big, good-natured, playful fellow who thoroughly enjoyed a practical joke, whether he be the victim of the joke or the instigator. If he had a temper, he had never allowed it to come to the surface. He excelled in all sports in the gymnasium, and somewhere, somehow, he found more funny stories than any other man on the force. The trite old saying that he would give a friend the shirt off his back fitted him like a new kid glove. He gave freely to his friends, and in giving seemed to find real joy. After 12 years' service on the guard line, Asa was still an ordinary wall guard. This would seem discouraging to many, but not so to Asa. It was not generally known that he drew a larger salary than did the other wall guards. He was an excellent wall guard, hence he was kept on the wall, while newer men on the force were promoted to better positions. But Asa drew the salary of a shift captain, and was therefore content. He did not even seem to mind when he was taken from comfortable Tower No. 1 morning shift and detailed permanently to Tower No. 3 on the graveyard shift of night from 8 p.m. to 4 a.m. This change was deemed necessary for several reasons. First, because Asa positively refused to discriminate between short-termers and long-termers, or desperate men and harmless nuts, when using his rifle to stop a break, or the attempt of a single convict to escape.
The men being locked in their cells at night, Asa, as a night guard, would have little opportunity to practice rifle shooting with a running convict as the target. Another reason for detailing him to Tower Number 3 was because trouble was expected some night at that point in the yard, and with surefire Asa on the job, the officials felt that any attempt of the convicts to escape would be promptly frustrated. One of Asa's wholesome habits, when no convicts were near him, was singing. It was not singing, really, but Asa thought it was, and he shortened the long, lonesome hours at night on Tower Number 3 with song, because he knew and sang but one. It was not a late or popular song, and as Asa sang it, it sounded like the frogs that croak in the marshes at night. When I die and am buried deep, I'll return at night to take a peep at those who hated me. I'll haunt their homes and spoil their sleep, chill their blood, the skin will creep on those who hated me. Not a pretty song, nor did it make cheerful those guards who passed near Tower Number 3 while making the night rounds, but Asa loved that song. It was while the wall was being extended another 200 feet to make room within the enclosure for a new cell house that Asa shot the lifer Malcolm Halsey. The end wall, extending from Tower Number 3 to Tower Number 4, had been torn down, and the stones moved 200 feet farther south to be used on the new wall. A temporary barbed wire fence had been erected about the area in which the convicts worked on the new wall. Extra armed guards were stationed at intervals of 50 feet outside the enclosure to guard the working convicts.
Malcolm Halsey had successfully feigned illness one day and was allowed to remain in his cell. Cell house guards had seen him lying in his bunk, only the top of his head showing above the blankets. At lock-up time, the cell house guards making the count saw a foot protruding from under the blankets in Halsey's bunk and what they believed to be the top of his head showing at the head of the bed. At 10:15 that night, the eagle-eyed Asa Shores on Tower Number 3 saw a dark figure slip under the lower wire of the temporary fence and run. Asa fired once and saw the man fall. Then Asa, to comply with the prison rules, yelled "Halt!" The command, of course, was needless, Halsey having halted abruptly when a .30-30 rifle ball ploughed through his shoulder. After the convict had been carried to the hospital, his cell was opened by the curious guards. A cleverly carved wooden foot protruded from under the blankets at the foot of the bed. Several bags of old clothing reposed under the blankets, and a thatch of black horsehair showed at the head of the bed. Before Halsey left the hospital, the new wall was completed. Tower Number 4, across from Tower Number 3, had been torn down, and a new Tower Number 4 built on the new corner of the wall, 200 feet farther south. On the other corner, across from new Tower Number 4, was new Tower Number 3. Old Tower Number 3 was left standing until further orders. Asa Shores remained on the graveyard shift on Old Tower Number 3. While off-duty one day, Asa, prowling about inside the walls, met Malcolm Halsey. The lifer was still a bit pale and wear from the gunshot wound. "One thing I'd like to have you explain, Mr. Shores," said Halsey. "You plugged me in the shoulder, then yelled 'Halt!' Why didn't you command me to stop before firing?" "Well, it was this way, Halsey," Asa replied, unsmiling and looking the convict squarely in the eye. "I aimed at the spot where I calculated your heart ought to be, but the light was poor and I had to shoot quick. I naturally supposed you were dead when I commanded you to halt, and believing you dead, I could see no reason for being in a hurry with the command. Sorry I bungled the job that way, but my intentions were good." "But," the scowling lifer persisted, "you haven't told me yet why you shot before commanding me to halt." "Oh, that?" Asa drawled with a deprecatory shrug of his massive shoulders. "That is merely a matter of form with me. I very often, after shooting a convict, yell 'Halt' some time the next day or week. Besides, if you had a nice chance to bump me off, you wouldn't say, 'Beware, Mr. Shores, I'm about to kill you.'" For a half-minute, convict and keeper gazed into each other's eyes. "I getcha," Halsey finally said, "and I guess you're right.
I have an idea, though, that my turn comes next, Mr. Shaw's, and there'll be no preliminary command or argument." "Fair enough, Halsey," Asa replied as he turned away. At last the big new cell house was completed. Asa wondered whether he would be left on Old Tower number 3. It had been decided, he knew, that the old tower would be left on the wall, but perhaps not used. To celebrate the completion of the new building, the warden declared a holiday and issued orders that all the inmates be given the privilege of the yard that day. There was to be wrestling, boxing, foot racing, and other sports. Asa Shaw's sleeping quarters was a low, ceilinged room on the ground floor in one of the towers of the old cell house. Asa had been warned a number of times that his room was not a safe place to sleep in the daytime. Convicts in the yard could enter the room at any time during the day without being seen by the yard guards or wall guards. Though the one door to the room was thick and heavy, Asa seldom, if ever, locked it. Asa had risen in the afternoon, complaining to himself about the noise being made by the convicts in the yard. His peevishness vanished, however, after a cold wash, and he sang as he stood looking out at one of the windows and brushing his hair. "When I die and am buried deep, I'll return at night to take a peep at those who hated me. I'll haunt their homes and spoil their sleep, chill their blood, the skin will creep on those who—" Ace's song ended then, ended in a horrible gurgle. A trustee found him an hour later lying in a pool of blood near the open window. His throat had been cut by a sharp instrument in the hand of a person unknown. Halsey, the lifer, was questioned, of course, but there was absolutely nothing to indicate that it was he who committed the murder. The guards looked sadly upon all that remained of Asa Shaw's and said to each other in hushed voices, "It had to come. Asa was too good a convict guard not to be murdered." And though the prison stool pigeons kept their ears and eyes opened, though each guard became a detective, the murder of Asa Shaw's remained a mystery. Old Tower number 3 was closed, and the doors locked. There was no immediate use for it. The warden was contemplating the advisability of having another guard's entrance gate cut through the wall under the tower. In this case, of course, the tower would be used again. Night Captain Jesse Dunlap sat alone in the guard's lookout, inside the walls, at 1 o'clock on the morning following the murder Asa Shaw's. Bill Wilton, the night yard guard, was making his round about the buildings in the yard. Captain Dunlap lazily watched the brass indicators on the report board before him. The indicator for Tower number 1 made a half-turn to the left, and a small bell on the board rang. The captain lifted the receiver from the telephone at his elbow and received the report, "Tower number 1, Anderson on duty, all okay." Dunlap merely grunted a response and replaced the receiver on the nook. Presently, the indicator for Tower number 2 turned to the left. The bell tinkled, and Dunlap again took the receiver from the hook. "Tower number 2, Briggs on duty, all okay," came the report over the wire. Then came new Tower number 3, next Tower number 4. From the 3 outside guard posts came the reports, and one from the cell house, each guard turning in his post number, his name, and the usual OK. All the indicators on the board, except that for Old Tower number 3, were now turned. Captain Dunlap relaxed in his chair, sighed heavily, and lit his pipe. Lazily, his eyes wandered back to the indicator board. The unturned indicator for Old Tower number 3 held his gaze, and utter sadness gripped him for a moment. Night after night, promptly on the hour, he had seen the indicator for Old Tower number 3 flip jauntily to the left, and had heard the tinkle of the little bell on the board. It had always seemed to him that the indicator for Asa Shaw's tower turned with more pep than the other indicators, that the bell had tinkled more cheerily, that good old Asa Shaw's report carried a note of cheerfulness that lightened the lonesome watches of the night. Now the old tower was cold, even as poor old Asa was cold. The doors were locked and barred. Never again, thought Dunlap, would be heard Asa Shaw's familiar song on the quiet night air. What were the words to that song? "When I am dead and buried deep, I'll return at night to take a peep at those who hated." Captain Dunlap suddenly sat erect in his chair. The pipe fell from his lips and clattered on the floor as his lower jaw dropped and his eyes opened wide to stare at the indicator board. The indicator for Old Tower number 3 was moving not with a quick turn to the left, but in a hesitant, jerky way that caused the root of every hair on Captain Dunlap's head to tingle. Never before had the captain seen an indicator behave like that. In fact, the indicator system was designed and constructed in such a way that, being controlled by electric contacts, the various indicators would snap into position when a push button in each tower was pressed by the guard on duty in that tower. In short, an indicator, in accordance with all the rules of electricity as applied to the system, must remain stationary or jerk to the left when the button in the tower was pressed. But here was indicator for Old Tower number 3 wavering, trembling to the left, only to fall back repeatedly to a vertical position. Then again, jerkily, hesitantly to the left, as if a vagrant soul strove to brush aside the veil that banished it from the living. Captain Dunlap sat rigid and watched the uncanny movements of the bright brass indicator. Vague, fleeting, chaotic thoughts of crossed wires, practical jokers, wandering souls tumbled one after another through his brain. If only the bell would not tinkle. If it did ring, well, death then, though it had taken away what was mortal of Asa Shaw's, had not conquered his eternal vigilance and strict attention to duty. Farther to the left wavered the indicator, hesitantly, uncertainly. Then the bell rang. A weak, slow ring it was, that sounded strange and unnatural in the death-like silence of the dimly lighted lookout.
Captain Dunlap was a brave man. He had smilingly faced death a dozen times in Granite River Prison. But always his danger was known to be from living, breathing men. Abject terror gripped him now, a nameless terror that seemed to freeze the blood in his veins, contract every muscle and nerve of his body, smother his heart. But even then reasoning struggled for recognition in his mind. What if it were a part of Asa Shaw's, a part of him that remained on Earth to defy death and carry on? Hasn't Asa always been Captain Dunlap's friend? Why should he fear the spirit of a friend? Dunlap reached forth a trembling hand, took the receiver from the hook, and slowly, reluctantly, placed it to his ear. How he wished, hoped, prayed that no voice would come over the wire. But it did come, preceded by a faint whispering sound. Old Tow. A long pause, then weakly, almost inaudibly, as if the message came from a million miles away. Old Tower 3. Show. Another pause, a jumble of meaningless words, then a chuckle. God, Asa's familiar chuckle. On duty. All O. All O. A light laugh, a sharp buzzing sound, a sigh, the faint tinkle of a bell, then silence. Dunlap heard no click of a receiver being replaced on a hook. The line was apparently still open. Still holding the receiver to his ear, the captain moistened his dry lips with the tip of his tongue. His free hand went involuntarily to his forehead in a vague, uncertain gesture, and came away damp with perspiration. Must he answer that ghost call? Must he speak to that thing that held the line? When he at last spoke, his voice was husky, a strange voice even to him. Who did it, Asa? Who, if you are dead, if this is you, Asa, tell me, who did it? Again that queer, unfamiliar buzzing sound.
Then from old tower number 3, or from beyond the grave perhaps, came a faint, whispering, uncertain voice. It was... The voice ended in a gurgle. Dunlap replaced the receiver on the hook, and as he did so, his eyes rested on the indicator board, and he gasped sharply, for the indicator for old tower number 3 went wavering, trembling back to a vertical position on the time dial. This unheard-of behavior of the indicator was the deepest mystery of all. The indicators, each controlled independent of the others by push-buttons in each tower, were constructed mechanically to turn only from the right to left. The indicator for old tower number 3 had turned back from left to right. Captain Dunlap made no effort to solve the mystery. Old tower number 3 was securely locked and could not be approached except by crossing over the wall from new tower number 3 on the southeast corner of the wall, or from tower number 2 on the northeast corner of the wall. Dunlap himself had closed and locked the doors and windows to the tower. There was but one key to the tower doors, and that key was in Dunlap's pocket.
Unlike the other towers, old tower number 3 could not be entered from the ground outside the wall. It was built solidly of stone from the ground up, and the only entrances were the 2 doors communicating with the top of the wall on either side of the tower. Besides, strict orders had been given that no one enter the tower unless ordered there by a shift captain, and too, in the glare of the arc lights near the wall, it would be impossible for anyone to cross the wall to the tower without being seen by other wall guards. Could the mysterious report have come from one of the other wall towers? Impossible for this reason. When the push button in one of the wall towers, say that in old tower number 3, was pressed by the man on duty there, the indicator on the board in the captain's lockout turned to the left a quarter turn on the time dial. The small bell on the board rang, and all telephone connections with the other towers were automatically cut off, until the captain had replaced the telephone receiver on the hook after receiving the report from old tower number 3. Dunlap said nothing to Bill Wilton when the latter returned to the yard lookout after making his round in the yard. It would be best, he reasoned, to say nothing to anybody about the mysterious call. They would only laugh at him if he told them about it. If the indicator had not returned to a vertical position on the time dial, he would have some proof on which to base his wild story of the ghost call, but the indicator had, before his own eyes, returned to its former position after the call. An hour later, at 2 a.m., Dunlap fearfully watched the indicator for old tower number 3. Reports from all other posts had been received. Then, just once, the indicator trembled uncertainly, made almost a quarter turn to the left, and snapped back to a vertical position. At 3 o'clock, it did not move, nor did it at 4 o'clock. A week passed. Not a tremor disturbed the ghost tower indicator. Then, one morning at 1:30 o'clock, an unearthly piercing scream in the cell house awaked half the men in the building and sent the cell house guards scurrying down to cell 21 on the corridor, for it was from this cell that the blood-chilling scream had come. The bloodless, perspiration-dampened face of Malcolm Halsey, the lifer, was pressed against the bars of the cell door when the guard arrived. The convict's great hands grasped the bars, and his 250-pound bulk, clad in only a regulation undershirt, twitched, started, and trembled from head to foot. A horrible fear distended his eyes, his teeth clicked together, and the muscles of his face worked spasmodically. "Sick, Halsey?" the guard demanded, hardened to such nerve-shattering outbursts in a building full of tortured souls. I saw, Halsey began, his teeth chattering and rendering speech well-nigh impossible. "I saw. Oh, Mr. Hill, please give me a cellmate. Now, tonight. I'm a sick man, Mr. Hill. Nerves all shot to pieces, I guess. Can't I have a cellmate to talk to, Mr. Hill?" "What did you see?" the guard asked. "He was standing right where you are now," Halsey whispered hoarsely. "Pointing his fingers at me he was, when I opened my eyes and saw him. Smiling, too. A violent shudder. "I could see through him, Mr. Hill. Could see the bars on that window beyond him. Who? See who?" the guard interrupted. Halsey seemed to realize then that he was talking too much, that he was not conducting himself as the hardest convict in the prison should.
"Why," he stammered, I thought I saw an old pal of mine. He's been dead a long time. Nerves, I guess. Thinking too much about my old pal and the good old days. Nightmare, I guess." "Yeah, nightmare is right," the unsympathetic guard growled. "But don't let another blat like that out of you, or we'll throw you into the padded cell. Got the old wings stirred up. Get to bed now, and forget that good old pal of yours." "If I only could," Halsey whispered huskily to himself as he got back into the bunk. 2 weeks passed. There were no more outbursts from cell 21. The ghost tower on the wall was silent, cold. Then, at 2 o'clock one morning, Captain Dunlap saw the indicator move. It sickened him, made him wish ardently that he was 1,000 miles from Granite River Prison. The indicator moved slowly, hesitantly to the left, and the bell tinkled weakly. The captain placed the receiver to his ear, but no sound came. The line was dead. The indicator fell back to its original position as the captain replaced the deceiver on the crotch. A few minutes later, the yard guard entered the lookout. Bill Wilton, the regular yard guard on the graveyard shift, was away on leave, and the substitute guard was new at the prison. "Didn't I understand you to say, Mr. Dunlap, that there was no one on Old Tower number 3? "You sure did," Dunlap answered. The guard pulled his left ear and looked puzzled. "Funny," he finally remarked. "Was sure I heard somebody in that tower, singing soft and low like when I passed under it a few minutes ago." "What was he singing?" the captain asked, bending forward and fixing a penetrating gaze on the recent arrival at the prison. "Let me see now," said the guard meditatively. "Couldn't make out much of the song. Something about 'when I die in the ocean deep.' No, that wasn't it. 'When I die and am buried deep.' That's it. Then there was something in it about this dead guy coming back to haunt people, and a lot of bunk like that." "I see," said Dunlap, as he eased himself out of the chair. "I'm going up and have a look around in the tower. You stay in here until I return." Dunlap went outside the walls and up through New Tower number 3, where guard Jim Humphrey was questioned. Humphrey had not seen or heard anything unusual in or about Old Tower number 3. Captain Dunlap, as he walked over the wall toward the ghost tower, admitted frankly to himself that he was scared stiff. Pausing at the door, he glanced nervously through the window.
The yard lights lit up the interior of the tower sufficiently to assure him that no one or thing was inside. He unlocked the door and entered. With a flashlight, he thoroughly examined the telephone. Dust had settled on the instrument. The receiver and the transmitter had apparently not been touched since Asa Shaw's left the tower. Dust had settled on the doorknobs inside. That the knobs had not been touched since Shaw's death was obvious. The one chair, the windowsills, the small washstand and wash basin, all were covered with a thin, undisturbed film of fine dust. There on the telephone battery box reposed Asa's old corncob pipe, and near it a small box of matches. The window latches were just as Dunlap had left them when he closed and securely locked the tower a month before. It was a puzzled and nervous prison official that left the tower, relocked the doors, and returned to the inside lookout. Next day, Malcolm Halsey, the lifer, was admitted to the hospital. The doctor's diagnosis was nervous breakdown. But Halsey, though his nerves were all shot to pieces, was still capable of shrewd plotting. His admittance to the hospital had been hastened by a diet of soap. Halsey was so anxious to get far away from Granite River Prison, and was so certain of his ability to do so if he could only be admitted to the hospital, that he had resorted to the old but effective expedient of soap eating. Soap, taken internally in small doses, will produce various baffling and apparently serious physiological changes in the body. Halsey looked sick and felt sick, but he was not dangerously ill. For many months, Malcolm Halsey had been watching closely the movements of the night guards. During his stay in the hospital, while recovering from the gunshot wound in his shoulder, he had doped out a possible means of escape, and he was on the point of making the attempt when the doctor pronounced him sufficiently recovered to be returned to the cell house.
The Lifer's plan of escape was simply this. At midnight, while Captain Dunlap and his crew were on duty, the yard guard made his round, counted the patients in the hospital, and left the yard through the guard's gate to eat his lunch in the guard's dining room outside the walls. When the yard guard returned to the inside lookout, he carried with him a hot lunch for Captain Dunlap. In counting the men in the hospital, the yard guard did not, as a rule, enter the building. He merely turned on the lights in one large ward and looked through the window. The convict hospital nurse on night duty stood ready, and when the lights were turned on, proceeded from bed to bed and partly uncovered each patient so that the yard guard outside could see and count them. There were several factors in Halsey's favour now, one being that a new substitute guard was on duty over the guard's entrance gate during the absence of the regular guard who was away on vacation. There was only one patient in the hospital besides Halsey. The yard guard must be lured into the hospital, overpowered, his uniform stripped from him. Then Halsey, garbed in the uniform, would attempt to deceive the guard at the gate and be given the keys. At 15 minutes to midnight on Halsey's first day in the hospital, the Lifer quietly rose from his bed while the white-clad convict nurse's back was turned. 3 minutes later, the unsuspecting nurse had been neatly laid out from a well-directed blow behind the ear, bound with sheets, gagged, stripped of his white suit, and tenderly tucked in the bed recently occupied by Mr. Malcolm Halsey. The other patient, a feeble old convict, was gagged and tied down in his bed with sheets. Halsey then donned the nurse's white suit, and after arranging the nurse and the old convict in their beds so that they appeared to be sleeping peacefully, the Lifer lay face down on the floor and awaited developments. At 12 o'clock, the new guard appeared at the hospital window and switched on the lights. Having counted the men in the hospital every hour since 8 o'clock, the guard intended now to give the patients a hasty glance and proceed to the gate. There were his two patients, apparently sleeping peacefully. But where was the nurse? Halsey's heart pounded like a riveting hammer as he lay sprawled on the floor. Would the ruse work? Would the guard enter the hospital to investigate, or would he report to Captain Dunlap when he saw the white-clad figure on the floor? The guard's eyes then rested on the man on the floor. "Ha!" he ejaculated. "Funny place for Nursey to be sleeping." But the nurse's sprawled form did not indicate slumber. The guard was puzzled. Perhaps the nurse had fainted or fallen and hurt himself. The guard tapped on the window with a key. No answer. No movement of nurse or patients. Then the unsuspecting screw locked the door and entered. An older guard would have reported to the captain. He was in the act of bending over to turn the pseudo-nurse upon his back when his ankles were suddenly seized and his feet perked from under him. The guard's head struck an iron bedstead as he fell, thus relieving Halsey of the unpleasant job of beating him into unconsciousness. Several minutes later, the Lifer, wearing the guard's uniform, boldly approached the gate. "What's on the menu tonight, Frank?" Halsey casually asked, pulling his hat further down over his eyes. "Same old thing, hash," the gate guard answered as he lowered the keys. Though the suspense, anxiety, and uncertainty were terrible, Halsey whistled calmly as he unlocked the first gate. The large bull lock on the outside gate was not so easily unlocked. Halsey fumbled, his hands shook, in spite of all he could do to keep it up, wheezed, went off key, then died in a discordant wail. "Say," the gate guard suddenly blurted, "look up here. By cracky, your actions don't look good to me." Halsey did not look up. He gave the key another frantic twist, and the lock opened. In that short space of time, the wall guard had raced into the lookout and seized a shotgun. As he stepped to the door of the lookout, a dark figure disappeared around the corner of a building 20 feet from the gate. A moment later, the alarm in the guards' quarters rang frantically, and a dozen sleepy-eyed men tumbled from their beds, slipped on shoes and trousers, and ran out into the yard. The gate guard could only tell where he last saw the escaping convict. To capture the man on such a dark night seemed hopeless, considering, too, that the fleeing man had a 7-minute start. However, the half-dressed guards scattered and made for a heavy willow thicket several 100 yards beyond the spot where the convict was last seen.
For 5 minutes after the pursuing guards disappeared in the darkness, silence reigned over the prison. Then, from a distant point in the dark thicket, a hair-raising, half-animal, half-human shriek of mortal terror shattered the stillness of the night and echoed and re-echoed about the high prison walls. White-faced guards, temporarily unnerved by that fearful wail, crashed through the brush, their flashlights playing about like the eyes of spinding demons. Then they found Malcolm Halsey, the lifer. Grovelling face down in the mud of a little creek bank, hands clutching at empty air, great spasms of maniacal terror passing through his body. The one-time terror of the prison muttered insane, incoherent things. 2 guards pulled him to his knees. Others turned flashlights on his face, a face such as is seen in horrible nightmares, a ghastly face, partly covered with black mud, a pallid face where it shone through the grime. The eyes were wide, protruding, glassy. "See! See!" the convict rasped hoarsely, pointing a mud-smeared hand at a dense black nook in the thicket. "See! He stands there and points at me and laughs. It's Asa Shaw's. He's been in my cell every night for weeks, laughing at me. He sang a death song to me, always sang, always laughed, wouldn't let me sleep. He's coming toward me. Stop him, please!" Then another horrible shriek, a shudder, a gasp, and the guards dropped the lifeless form of Malcolm Halsey in the mud. By some queer whim of fate, the speechless guards involuntarily switched off their flashlights. Utter darkness, utter silence enveloped them. Then a faint sound was heard. "Listen," came the hoarse voice of guard Jerry Clark. "Do you hear it?" Very little of it could be heard. It was a faint sound, and growing fainter. "When I die and am buried deep, I'll return at night to—" Then it was gone, and all was still again. The Ghoul and the Corpse by G.A. Wells. This is Chris Bonner's tale, not mine. Please remember that. I positively will not stand sponsor for it. I used to have a deal of faith in Chris Bonner's veracity, but that is a thing of the past. He is a liar without conscience. I as good as told him to his face. I wonder what kind of fool he thinks I am. Attend now, and you shall hear that remarkable tale he told me. It was and is a lie. I shall always think so. He came marching into the igloo up there at Aurora Bay. That is in Alaska, you know, on the Arctic Sea. I had been in the back country trading for pelts for a New York concern, and due to bad luck, I didn't reach the coast until the 3rd day after the last steamer out had gone. And there I was, marooned for the winter, without chance of getting out until spring, with a few dozen ignorant Indians for companions. Thank heaven I had plenty of white man's grub in tins. As I said, here came Chris Bonner marching in on me, the same as you would go down the block a few doors to call on a neighbour. "And where the devil did you drop in from?" I demanded, helping off with his stiff parka. "Down there," he answered, jerking an elbow toward the south. "Let's have something to eat, McNeil. I'm hungry as hell. Look at the pack, will you?" I had already looked at the pack he had cast off his shoulders to the fur-covered floor of the igloo. It was as lean as a starved hound.
I heated a can of beef bouillon and some beans, and made a pot of coffee over the blubber-fat fire that served for both heat and light, and put these and some crackers before my guest. He tore into his meal wolfishly. "Now a pipe and some tobacco, McNeil," he ordered, pushing his empty dishes aside. I gave him one of my pipes and my tobacco pouch. He filled and lighted up. He seemed to relish the smoke. I imagined he hadn't had one for some time. He sat silent for a while, staring into the flickering flame. "Say, McNeil," he spoke at length, "what do you know about a theory that says once on a time this old world of ours revolved on its axis in a different plane? I've heard it said the Earth tipped up about 70 degrees. What do you know about it?" That was a queer thing for Chris Bonner to ask. He was Simon Pure Prospector, and I had never known him to get far away from the subject of mining and prospecting. He had been hunting gold from Panama to the Arctic Circle for the past 30 years. "No more than you do, probably," I answered his question. "I've heard of that theory too. I'd say it is any man's guess." "This theory holds that the North Pole used to be where the equator is now," he said. "Do you believe that?" "I don't know anything about it, Chris," I replied, "but I do know that they have found things up this way that are now generally recognized as being peculiarly tropical in nature." "What, for instance?" "Palms and ferns, a species of parrot, saber-toothed tigers, and also mastodons, members of the elephant family. All fossils and parts of skeletons, you understand. No human beings, McNeil? Any skeletons or fossils of those up this way?" "Never heard of it. Prehistoric people are being found in England and France, however." "Huh," he said. He pondered, puffing at his pipe, his eyes on the fire. He looked perplexed about something. "Look here, McNeil," he said suddenly. "Say a man dies. He's dead, ain't he?" "No doubt about it," I laughed, wondering. "Couldn't come to life again, eh?" "Hardly. Not if he were really dead. I've heard of cases of suspended animation. The heart apparently quits beating for 1, 2, or possibly 10 minutes. It doesn't, in fact, though. It's simply that its beating can't be detected. When a man's heart stops beating, he's dead." Bonner nodded. "Suspended animation," he muttered, more to himself than to me. "That must be it. That's the only thing that'll explain it. Nothing else will. If it could cover a period of 10 minutes, why not a period of 20 or even 100,000 years?" "If you'd like to turn in and get some rest, Chris, I'll fix you up," I broke in. He caught the significance of my tone and grinned. "You think I'm crazy, eh?" he said. "I'm not. It's a wonder, though, considering what I've seen and what Here, let me show you something." He thrust a hand into his lean pack and brought forth an object that at first glance I thought to be a butcher's knife. He handed it to me, and I at once saw that it was not a butcher's knife as I knew such knives. It was a curious sort of knife, and one for which a collector of antiques would have paid good money. It was a very dark colour, almost black, corroded, it seemed to me, as if it had lain for a long time in a damp cellar. It was in one piece, the handle about 5 inches long, and the blade perhaps 10 inches. Both edges of the blade were sharp, and the end was pointed like a dagger, and it certainly wasn't steel. I scratched one side of the blade with my thumbnail and exposed a creamy yellow under the veneer of black. "Part of that's blood you scraped away, McNeil," Bonner said. "Now what's that knife made of?" I examined the yellow spot closely. The knife was made of ivory. Not the kind of ivory I was acquainted with, however. It was a very much coarser grain than any ivory I had ever seen. "That came out of a mastodon's tusk, McNeil," Bonner said. I looked at him. He was nodding, seriously. He apparently believed what he said, at any rate. "Nice curio, Chris," I commented, handing the thing back to him. "Heirloom, no doubt. Picked it up in one of the Indian villages, eh?" He did not speak at once. He sat puffing, looking at the fire. Once he puckered his brows in a deep frown.
I waited. I've been prospecting as usual, down there around the headquarters of the Tukavuk. It's an awful place. Nobody ever goes there. The Indians tell me the spirits of the dead live there. I can believe it. It's an ideal place for imps and devils, and I was right through the heart of it. I believe I'm the first. No matter how I got there, I came up from the south last summer. You see, I had an idea there was gold in that country. The place where I finally settled down was in a little valley on one of the branches of the Tukavuk, between two ranges of hills running from 500 to maybe 3,000 feet high. Messy-looking place it was, all littered up as if the Lord had a few sizable chunks of stuff left over and just threw 'em down there to be out of the way. But the gold was there. I could almost smell it. I'd been getting some mighty nice colour in my pan. That's what made me decide to stay there. I got there about the middle of July, and I spent the rest of the summer sinking holes in the edge of the creek and along the benches above. What I found indicated that there was a mighty rich vein of the yellow metal thereabouts, with one end laying in a pocket of the stuff. If I could locate that pocket, I'd have the United States Treasury backed off the map. But I wasn't able to run the pocket down by taking bearings from my holes, because the holes didn't line up in any particular direction. What with my interest in trying to get a line on that pocket, I didn't notice that the season was getting late. But I'd brought in enough grub to last the winter through, so that didn't matter. Just the same, it was up to me to get some sort of shelter over my head, so I hustled up a one-room shack about 12 by 12 I cut from the timber on the slopes with my hand axe. Nothing fancy, but tight enough. I put in a fireplace and cut and stacked a lot of wood outside. That done, winter was on me. I simply couldn't resist the temptation to have one more try at finding the pocket that spewed the yellow metal all around there. As I said, I got no information from the hole sunk, and it was pure guesswork. I guessed I'd find my pocket on the side of a certain hill, about 200 feet above creek level. A glacier flowed down the side of that hill through a little gully, and my idea was that the ice ground away at the pocket and brought the metal down to the creek, and the creek scattered it. This theory was borne out to some extent by the fact that my best showings of colour always came from a point a little below the conjunction of the creek and glacier. It was snowing the morning I took my pan and shovel and started up the side of the hill, keeping to the edge of the glacier. It wasn't much of a glacier for size, say about 15 feet wide. I could see it winding up the side of the hill until it went out of sight through a cleft about 1,000 feet up, fed by a lake up there probably. I had climbed the hill maybe 100 feet following the edge of the glacier when I caught sight of a dark blotch in the edge of the ice. It was about 2 feet under the surface. I brushed away the film of snow to have a look. The ice was as crystal as a crystal, of a blue colour. And what d'you think, McNeil? It was a man's body. He paused and gave me a quick glance. I wanted to see how I took that, I presumed. The body of a man, he went on, and the queerest-looking man I ever saw in my life. He was lying on his belly, and I didn't get a look at the front of him just then, but I knew it was a man all right. He was covered all over with long hair like a bear, say. Not a stitch of clothes. "What did you do?" I asked. Why, I was that surprised I let my pan and shovel drop and stared at the damn thing with the eyes near popping out of my head. What would anybody do finding a hair-covered thing like that frozen in a glacier? I won't deny I was a bit scared, McNeil. Well, I stood there staring at the thing for I don't know how long. It didn't occur to me then to ask myself how the thing got there. Certainly the idea of fossils or prehistoric men didn't enter my head. I didn't think much about anything. I just stood there gaping. You know me, McNeil. I guess I'm pretty soft-hearted in some respects. I'd stop to bury a dead dog I found in the road. I knew I wouldn't rest easy until I'd cut that thing out of the glacier and given it decent burial. Moreover, I didn't want it where I'd be seeing it when I went to work on that hillside in the spring. And it surely would be there in the spring, because I imagine that glacier didn't move an inch a year. So I went back to the shack and got my axe, and with none too good a heart for the job, turned to and made the chips fly. It took me about 3 hours to get the thing out of the glacier. You see, as I came down to it, I went slow. I don't care to hack even a dead man. Say, McNeil, can you imagine what it meant to me digging a corpse out of a glacier down there on the side of a hill in that devil-ridden country? No, you can't, and that's the truth. You'd have to go through it to know. It was hell. I don't want any more of it in mine. Nor what followed either. What was that? I asked, when he deliberated. You'll hear, he answered, and went on.
I got the thing out at last, little chunks of ice clinging to it, and dragged it ashore, if a glacier has a shore. It froze me to look at the thing with those little chunks of ice sticking to the long hair. Once, at Doxon, I'd seen a man pulled out of the Yukon, ice clinging to him. That was different, though. At Doxon, there was a crowd to sort of buck a man up. I turned the thing over on its back to see what it looked like in front. Well, said I, you've seen apes, McNeil. This thing looked like that? I countered, beginning to connect up his first queer questions with what he was telling me. You don't mean it, Chris. I'm telling you, he nodded solemnly. An ape man, that's what it was. More man than ape, if you ask me. For instance, the face was flatter than an ape's, and the forehead and chin were more pronounced. The nose was flat, but it wasn't an ape's nose, and the hands and feet were like those of a man. Oh, it was a man, all right. The thing that convinced me, I think, was the knife gripped in its hand. The knife you have there? I inquired. This very knife, he answered. What then, Chris? I urged him to go on. I had a good look at that thing and started for my shack. Yes, McNeil, I ran, and I'm not ashamed to say so. It scared me. Ugliest thing I ever saw. Eyes wide open, glaring and glinting, and the thick lips parted to show the nastiest set of fangs I ever saw in the mouth of man or beast. Why, I tell you, the damned thing looked alive. No wonder I scooted. You would have done the same. Anybody would. Back in the shack, I sat down on my bunk to think it over, and it was while I sat there trying to puzzle it out that I remembered that theory about the earth tipping over. That gave me a hint of what I had run up against. Of course, I'd heard about fossils and parts of skeletons of prehistoric men being found. Had I found not a fossil or part of a skeleton, but the prehistoric man himself? That knocked the wind out of me. If that were the case, my name would go down in history, and I would be asked to give lectures before scientific societies and such. Consider it, McNeil. I tell you, I couldn't quite grasp the thing. It was incredible. There I was in this year of our Lord, with the intact corpse of a man who lived God only knows how many centuries ago. That body, understand, could well be the key to the origin of mankind. It might possibly settle the Darwinian theory forever, one way or the other. It was pretty serious business for me, don't you see? Well, I decided to preserve it until I could get out and make a report of the find. But how to preserve it?
Of course, if I had left it in the glacier, it would have kept indefinitely, like a side of beef in cold storage. I was afraid to put it back in the hole in the glacier and freeze it in again with water I carried from the creek. The creek water might exert some chemical action that would ruin the thing, and if I let it lie where it was, the snow would cover it, form a warm blanket, and probably cause it to decompose. Then I'd have nothing left but the skeleton. I wanted to save the thing just as I'd found it. Maybe the scientists would find a way to embalm it.
I finally hit on the plan of keeping it in an ice pack. That would turn the trick until the weather took on the job. It hadn't turned bitter cold yet. I tell you, it was a nasty job keeping that thing iced with chunks I chopped from the glacier. And to make it worse, the weather stayed moderate for a couple of weeks. Then, suddenly, the mercury in my little thermometer went down with a rush, and it got stinging cold. I carried the thing to the shack and stood it up against the wall outside where it couldn't be covered with snow, and lashed it there. Can you imagine me going to sleep in my bunk in the shack every night after that, with that thing standing against the wall outside, not 2 feet away? Of course you can't. It frazzled my nerves, and more than once I was tempted to cut a hole in the ice on the creek and chuck the damn thing in where I'd never see it again. But no, I had to save it for the scientists and get my name in history. That idea got to be an obsession with me. I knew well enough that if ever I told people the tale I'm telling you now, without some proof of it, I'd get laughed at. No doubt of it, I sneered. The days went by, he continued, ignoring my sneer, and more that thing outside kept getting on my nerves. The sun went south, and from one day to another I never saw it. The never-ending night was bad enough, but when you add the northern lights and the howling of the wolves, you've got a condition that breaks a man if he's not careful. Furthermore, there was that ugly-looking devil outside to think about. I was thinking about that thing constantly, and got so I couldn't sleep. If I shut my eyes, I'd see it anyhow, and if I went to sleep, I'd have a nightmare over it. Now and then I'd go out and stand there in the starlight or the aurora, looking at it. It fascinated me, yet the sight of the thing gave me the creeps. Finally, I began taking a club or my rifle along when I went to look at it, got afraid the thing would come alive and try to murder me with that knife. And that's the way of things for maybe 3 months and more, my thoughts all the time on that thing outside. Well, that couldn't go on, you know. One morning I woke up with the worst headache a man ever had. I thought my head would split wide open. My blood was like molten iron flowing through my veins. I knew what it was. Fever. I had thought and worried about that thing outside until he got me, and I was in for a brainstorm. I was as weak as a cat, but managed to build up a good fire and pack my bunk with all the blankets and furs I had and crawl in. I only hoped I wouldn't freeze to death when the fire went out. I no sooner got all set in the bunk than things let go. I went completely off. I can't say positively what happened for a few days after that. Seems like I remember, though, periods when I was semi-rational. I think once I got up to put more wood on the fire. Another time I saw that thing standing in the doorway grinning at me like the devil it was. I shot at it with my rifle and later found a bullet in the door. My shooting couldn't have been a delusion at any rate, but the door was still fastened against the wolves and there were no tracks in the snow outside. Bonner paused to light his pipe and then went on. Well, I don't know exactly how long I was out of my head. I'd wound my watch before I crawled into the bunk the first time, and I half remember I wound it again when I got up to put wood on the fire, and it was pretty well run down. It goes 40 hours without winding, yet when my head cleared, it had stopped. I must have been off my nut for about 4 days. Well, you can lay your bottom dollar I'd had enough of prehistoric men hanging around the shack by that time.
Let the scientists be damned. I was determined to get rid of that thing the quickest way possible.
The quickest way, I thought, would be to get the corpse warm so it would decompose rapidly. Then I'd put it outside where the wolves and ravens would pick the bones clean. The scientists would have to be satisfied with the skeleton. So I made a big fire in the fireplace and got the shack good and hot, then went out and brought in the corpse. I got sick at the stomach on that job, but that was the only way. I didn't have the heart to leave the thing outside and build a fire over it out there. I try to respect the dead, even if the corpse is that of a man who had been dead several thousand years and looked more like an animal than a human being. I laid the thing on the floor before the fireplace, then sat down on the bunk to wait. I watched it pretty close, because being dead so long, I thought when it got warm and started to decompose, it would go like butter. I didn't want the shack to be all smelled up with the stink of it. Probably half an hour went by, then all of a sudden I saw the thing quiver. "Your brainstorm returning?" I interposed. "Wait," said Bonner sharply. It quivered, not much, but enough to notice. That sort of got me. Then I reasoned that anything thawing out like that would naturally quiver a little. Maybe another 15 or 20 minutes passed. Then one of the legs moved. Jerked, sort of. It startled me. Remember, there I was down there in those hills, alone with that thing. I was pretty susceptible to weird influences, understand? Anyhow, the leg moved, and it sat up and asked for a drink of water. I could not help putting in. Bonner continued, paying no attention to my sarcasm. He seemed to be talking aloud to himself. I watched it like a hawk for some time after that. Then, as I didn't see it move any more, I stepped outside to get some more wood for the fire and to pull a few good breaths of cold air into my lungs. That shack was like the inside of an oven. When I went in again, I saw that the damned thing had turned over on its back. Turned over on its back, I say. And there was a change in the eyes, too. They had a half-awake sort of look in them, a more alive look, understand? And breathing. Yes, sir, breathing. Why the thing didn't see me when I came in and shut the door, I don't know, but apparently it didn't. And believe me or not, the hand that held the knife was open, and the knife was lying on the floor apart from the body. Crazy? I tell you, no. I was as sane as I am now. I tell you, I saw these things with my own 2 eyes. Saw them just as plain as I see you now. I see you don't believe me, McNeil. Oh, well, I hardly believe it myself sometimes. He uttered a little laugh. But there it was, just as I'm telling you. And I was that gone when I saw that the thing had turned over on its back that I dropped the wood I had in my arm. The crash of it on the floor brought the thing to its feet on the jump. You needn't look at me like that. I tell you it did. I take my oath it did. There it was, crouched like a panther, ready for the spring, the eyes of it flashing like fire, its lips pulled back tight across the gums, and the yellow fangs showing. Can you see that? No, you can't. Bonner made an expressive gesture with one hand. Remarkable, but the thing hadn't seen me yet. It was looking at the fire. It was half turned towards me so I could see that. Suddenly, it screamed in an outlandish gibberish and leapt to the fireplace and tried to gather in an armful of flames. I take it the thing had never seen fire before, didn't know what it was, probably imagined it some kind of wild animal.
Naturally, the only thing it got out of that play was burned arms and hands, and the long hair sizzled and curled. It leaped back with a snarl, spitting that funny gibberish. Talk, I guess it was. It came from way down in the belly and sounded like pigs grunting. I tell you, McNeil, I was fair dazed, but I had the sense left to try help myself. My rifle was leaning against the bunk, and I made a quick dive for it. Then, apparently, the thing saw me for the first time. The way it glared at me with those glittering eyes was a caution. I didn't stop to argue. I snatched up the rifle, cocked it, and made a snap shot. The bullet caught the thing in the left breast, and the blood gushed. Of course you don't believe it, but blood, I tell you, gushed from the breast of a thing that had been frozen in a glacier for thousands of years. Well, here it came like a cyclone. I didn't have time to shoot again. Smell? That thing smelled like carrion, almost strangled me. Maybe you know how the cage of a wild animal stinks if it ain't cleaned out for a week or two. This thing smelled like that, only worse. I can smell it yet. Lord. Bonner wrinkled his nose and shivered. But there we were at grips, the thing making those belly noises and smelling like 1,000 garbage piles. It had the strength of 10 men, I sensed that. It jerked the rifle from me and bent the barrel of it double with a twist of the wrists. The barrel of a .38 caliber Winchester rifle, bent it as easy as you or I would bend a piece of copper wire. Then we were at it, fighting like a couple of wild cats all over the shack. I'm no slouch of a man myself, McNeil, when it comes to a rough and tumble, but that thing handled me like a baby. I could see my finish. We thrashed about the floor, me fighting like a devil, it fighting like 40 devils. We kicked into the fire and out again, and scattered live coals all over the place, and the shack took fire. I was just about gone when my hand accidentally fell on the handle of the knife the thing had dropped on the floor. I hung on to it and poked away at that thing for all I was worth, driving the blade clean up to the hilt with every punch. "That knife?" I broke in. "This knife," answered Bonner. "There's the dried blood on it yet, but I think it was really the bullet that did the work. It must have cut an artery. Anyhow, the blood kept gushing out of the thing's breast. It got on my hands and made 'em slippery. I knew the thing couldn't pour out blood like that and keep going. That's what put the heart in me to keep on fighting. And as I say, I think it was the bullet that did the work in the long run. A lucky shot, otherwise I wouldn't be here now." I felt the thing sagging and going limp in my hands, and its grip began to relax. I saw my chance and put up a knee and broke the grip and kicked it away. It staggered around a moment or two, clutching its breast with its bloody paws, gnashing its fangs and glaring murder at me. Then it crashed down to the floor and fell smack into the flames. I saw plain enough there was no chance of saving the shack, so I snatched up what I could lay my hands on in the way of food and clothing and blankets and tore out. I don't remember putting the knife in my pocket, but that's where I found it later. The shack burned down to nothing, and that thing burned with it. Probably not a bone of it left.
These scientists were out of luck, and the mystery of mankind would remain unsolved. I didn't stop to investigate, of course. My job was to make tracks. I knew about this village and came on. How I got here, I don't know. This is a terrible country to cross afoot in the winter. I'd turned my 10 huskies adrift to shift for themselves when I reached the valley where all this happened. I didn't have the grub to keep them going. I had to walk here. And that's all, McNeil. You can say what you please. I know what I saw with my own eyes, and you can't change my mind about it. Suspended animation? Yes, for a period covering many centuries. It would be a mighty fine thing if we could picture what happened way back then when this old earth tipped over. Perhaps we'd see a man that was half ape, crossing a creek with a knife in his hand on the way to murder an enemy sleeping on the opposite bank. Then suddenly the earth tipped over. Climatic conditions in those days were such as to freeze things up in a flash. Things are held in the grip of the ice, just as the dust and lava held them in the days of Pompeii, and, well, who's to say what happened? Anything was possible. We don't know the conditions of those days. Anyhow, here I come thousands of years later and dig a man, with a knife in his hand, out of a glacier. I heat his body in order to decompose the flesh. Instead of decomposing, he comes to life, and I have to kill him.
He's been hibernating in a glacier for centuries. I don't know what to think about it." Bonner refilled and lit his pipe, then looked at me questioningly. "Chris," I said, "I tell you frankly that I don't believe a word you have said. You tell me you were out of your head for a few days. That accounts for it. You had the gym jams and imagined all that, then tried to spring it on me as actual fact." He looked hurt. He looked at the knife in his hand steadily for several long moments, then thrust it toward me, his eyes boring into mine. "Then where in hell," he demanded, "did I get this knife?" Fear by David R. Solomon. There were only 5 words. They neither affirmed nor denied what had gone before, but they changed the whole trend of the argument. The men of the engineering gang were lying around the campfire, preparatory to going out on the job. It was cool in the shade of the thick trees, with the damp feel of early morning hanging over everything. Farther out, over the river, the sun gave promise of better weather later in the day. Smoking, waiting for the laggards to clean up their plates, the engineering gang, according to invariable man custom, had begun experiences, jokes, arguments. Over all hung the pungent smell of strong, fresh coffee and much frying bacon. Baldy Jenkins, the 18-year-old, had started it. "Wish I had $1 million, he remarked. Red Flannel Mike gave the ball a roll. "You do not," he denied stoutly. "Be giving you $1 million, and the Lord hisself only knows what you'd be a-doing with it." "Hell I don't," said Baldy. "Better I could tell you right now how I'd spend every penny of it." "Bet you don't," broke in another of the gang. "Fellow never does know what he's going to do till it hits him square between the eyes." "Offer me $1 million, insisted Baldy Jenkins. "Ah, not that way. Take something where 2 men might act different. You don't know what you do. I don't. No man does. No more'n that kid over there does." His lazy gesture indicated a small, khaki-trousered figure. The eyes of the rest of the gang followed. At first glance, she might have been a lad of 10 or 11 years. Closer inspection, however, showed the mop of flaxen hair bobbed off at the level of her ears and the tender little girl face. She was marching around the camp like an inspector general of an army, into this, that, everything. "Search she wouldn't," affirmed Red Flannel Mike. "Counters kids just like you and me. She'd have to be up against it to know, and maybe not then." "Ha! Even that kid." Baldy snatched up the gauntlet. They were off. Hot and royally waged the battle. The advocates of the unexpected gained ascendancy. Louder and more extravagant grew their claims. No man could predict anything. No man knew what he would do. Put him face to face with any situation, any danger, and he would act differently from the way he thought he would. It was then that Coulter spoke. He did not raise his voice. If anything, it was lowered. Hitherto, he had sat silent, listening to the battle of words, his bandaged left arm swung tightly at his side. "I don't know about that," was all he said.
Sudden quiet fell. There came a restless stirring, then tacit agreement. These men of rougher enjoyment, axemen, chainmen, engineers, centered their gaze upon Coulter's bandaged left arm. They knew what he was thinking about. They, too, had seen. They agreed with him that he could have but one possible reaction to one set of circumstances. All of them were employees of one branch or the other of the Consolidated Lumber Company. Coulter was in the legal department. There had arisen a nice question as to the exact ownership of a certain tract. Rather than take chances with the heavy statutory penalties for cutting trees upon another's land, they had sent a lawyer upon the ground. His work was finished. He was ready, more than ready, to return. City-bred, city-born,
Coulter had welcomed the chance to see a southern swamp. He had read all his life of Dixie, the land of the magnolia and cotton, of the mockingbird and the honeysuckle. He had welcomed his mission. He had even brought his daughter, Ruth, along. That was not at all unnatural, however. Wherever Coulter had gone for the last 10 years, there too had gone Ruth. They had not been separated longer than a day since the grey dawn that the other Ruth had placed the tiny bundle in his arms and turned her face to the wall. The child was all that was left of their love, save memories. She was Coulter's sole interest in life. Coming to this camp, Coulter had clad her in khaki and turned her loose in the open. It had done her good. The eyes of the stained figures around the campfire followed his gaze. They knew something of what he was thinking. They had heard him, in the midst of his pain, setting his teeth, gasp, "Get Ruth away, where she can't hear." That, from a man whom they had to restrain from killing himself to get freedom from the torture, was enough. Coulter's ignorance of the South and of the woods had been, perhaps, to blame. He did not know. All that he could remember was that he had been bending over the spring, his left arm resting upon the brink. He had not seen the moccasin until it was too late. Vividly, even yet, he saw the darkish head and body, the supple writhing, the swift dart, and the flash of pain, and then agony, much agony, deep, soul-biting torture. There was no doctor at the camp. There had been a delay before. Stupefied, he thought to let them know he had been bit. And then more agony. Agony piled upon agony. Not concealing their doubts as to their chances of saving his arm or him, they had slapped the rough tourniquet upon his arm and had twisted down upon the stick until he moaned, unwillingly, in pain. Then they had dipped one of the big hunting knives into boiling water and had cut his arm at the bite marks, gashing it across with great free-handed strokes, then back again at right angles, squeezing the cuts to make him lose the poisoned blood. Then they had cauterized the wound. Sick, half a faint, to Coulter it seemed that they were deliberately thinking up additional tortures. The white-hot iron that seared his flesh, tormenting the agonized ends of nerves that already had borne past the breaking point, was the final, exquisite touch of agony.
Coulter was one of those men who bear pain, even a slight pain, with difficulty. Even the sight of blood made him faint. This was horrible beyond anything he had ever dreamed. The physical racking, the feel of the steel blade cutting through his own flesh and sinew down to the bone, made him bite his lips till they spurted blood in the effort to keep from screaming aloud. He had not known they were through. He thought they were preparing additional crucifixion for him. Red flannel Mike had slapped the gun from his hands and made him understand, somehow, that it was all over, that they were through. But they watched him the rest of the night. That was why, as the argument rose around the morning campfire, Coulter was very sure that he knew what he would do under one set of circumstances. He knew one experience that nothing on earth could send him through again. All that and more was in his tone as he spoke. At his words, there came a restless stirring around the fire. Those men of the engineering gang had seen something of his experience. They knew what he was thinking. The abrupt ending of their argument showed that they agreed with Coulter. He saw and understood, and seeing, smiled bitterly. They knew only a part of it. To every man there is his one fear. The bravest man that ever trod the earth had his one especial dread. To some it is fire, to others cold steel, others still the clash of physical contact. But probe deep enough beneath the skin of any man alive, and you find it. Snakes were Coulter's fear. He could not explain it. He did not know why he, a man city-bred and born, had this obsession. It had been with him since he could remember.
As a child, once he had gone into a convulsion of fear over some pictures of snakes in a book. The old women of the family nodded their heads wisely and muttered things about a fright to his mother before his birth. Coulter did not know. All that he was certain about was that the thought, even, of the writhing, slippery, squirming bodies made his whole being shudder with revulsion, made tingles of absolute horror go up and down his back. Yes, the gang agreed with him. Yet they had seen only a part of what he had gone through. They had seen and appreciated only his physical suffering, and that was the least part. Coulter's nerves were in ragged shreds. He started and jumped at the slightest sound. His experience had intensified 1,000-fold his nervous horror of reptiles. The woods, the swamp were full of them. He ran upon them constantly. All the time he was longing for his hour of liberation when he could return to the city and to freedom. The unexpected flutter of a thrush as he walked through the woods would send his heart into his throat and his pulse to pounding in fear. Night after night he woke, chained hand and foot with dread that a snake had crawled up, in the dark, beside him. All the stories he had ever read of their crawling up into camps and getting into the bedding came to him, lingered with him, tortured him. He was no more asleep before he would awake, bathed in a cold sweat, afraid to move, afraid to lie still. All that, subconsciously, was in his words, in his manner, in his whole expression as he said, "I don't know about that." There came the silence of conviction. Even Red Flannel Mike, most zealous exponent of man's lack of knowledge of himself, was silenced. Somebody said something about the kid. Baldy, the 18-year-old, seized his advantage. I'll bet that even she... Baldy stopped abruptly. His whole frame stiffened, his eyes were riveted upon little Ruth. One by one, the rest of the gang turned to follow his gaze. Each followed his example. Ruth's scream cut the air a moment before Baldy's gasp of horror. My God, the kid's got a moccasin on her.
The child was close enough for the group to see clearly. Her head was bent back, straining away from the writhing horror. The sleek head slithered to and fro, darting, threatening, winding here and there about her. She seemed frozen with fear. Baldy had started forward. He stopped. Get me a gun," he barked. "Get a gun, quick." The reptile drew back its head. There came an interruption. White to his lips, staggering upon his feet, Coulter came forward. His face was ghastly pale. His unwilling feet buckled under him, threatening each moment to give way and pitch him forward upon his face. Slowly he edged closer. The slender head poised, watchful. Coulter's movements were scarcely discernible. Suddenly his well arm shot out, seizing, snatching at that loathsome body. There was a quick movement of the snake, far too rapid to be anticipated or avoided. The head drove forward. He felt the white-hot flash of pain. The rest was a haze of horror to him. It was rather as if he were a spectator at something concerning someone else. He did not command his body. He knew only, vaguely, what was happening. There came the feel of a sleek body in his hands, the lash and writhing against his arms of something that fought to break away. Then the grinding of his heel upon a head, and the flinging against him in death agony. Everything faded out then. His return to consciousness was marked by a hazy lightness of memory. In the bitten arm he could feel, mounting higher and higher, the numbness that had marked the other experience. His heart, too, seemed to be acting queerly, just as it had done before. Red Flannel Mike's broad back was bent from him as he mixed at something in a basin. They had carried him to his own tent. Coulter's holster was hanging from the tent pole. The numbness crept higher in his arm. Soon would begin the cutting of his flesh, the darting flames of pain.
He could not go through with that again. He could not bear it. Better far to finish with the gun what Mike had stopped before. Softly, he slid the gun from the holster and raised it for action. His finger pressed upon the trigger. The weapon dashed suddenly from his hand. "What the hell?" roared Mike. "You fool, what's the matter with you?" Give me that gun. You're as bad as Boldy Jenkins. Been in the woods all his life and mistakes a coach whip for a moccasin just because both of 'em are darkish. That wasn't any more moccasin than a polar bear. Yes, course he struck you. Any snake'll do that, but it ain't always poison. Your arm ain't even gonna be sore. Never mind about this gun. I'll give it back to you later on.
The Unknown Beast by Howard Ellis Davis. At the edge of the little settlement of Bayou La Tour lapped the black waters from which the village had been named. A mile to the south they lost themselves in the Mississippi Sound. Northward they wound among sombre swamps to disappear at last into the marshes above. Giant cypress trees crowded down to the very edge of the settlement, as if jealous of the small space of cleared land it occupied beside the bayou, and to one not accustomed to the place it seemed that an evil boding lurked forever within the depths of those overhanging gloomy swamps. But until the unknown beast first made its mysterious presence felt, no harm for the people of Bayou La Tour ever had come out of those swamps, except the deadly malaria which clutched its victims in shaking agues and burning fevers that consumed life as a woods fire might consume a strip of dried sedge-grass. Before this strange death that had come to haunt the night swamps, they shrank in helpless terror. Cows were driven in from their pastures while the sun was yet high. Mothers called in their sallow-faced children from play as soon as the shadows began to lengthen. The first victim was Swan Davis, an old fisherman who lived by himself on the edge of the bayou above the settlement. He had been found in the swamp, dead. At first it was thought that he had been beaten to death, he was so broken about the body. Finally, however, it was decided he had been crushed by some mysterious, unknown force. Something had caught him and squeezed him until his bones had cracked like dry reeds. Then the three Buntley boys, driving in a bunch of steers from the marshes, were overtaken by night on the swamp road. The cattle had been going peacefully enough when suddenly they had become frightened and lumbered off ahead, bellowing madly. Themselves frightened at the queer behavior of the animals, the boys followed as fast as they could on foot. That is, two of them did, for when Jard and Peter Buntley emerged from the shadows of the swamp road, they found that their brother Sims was not with them. Terror-stricken though they were, they returned into the swamp calling his name. When they saw nothing of him, and he did not answer their calls, they went quickly home and reported what had happened. All night long, bearing flaming torches, the men of the settlement beat up and down the swamp. Toward morning they found the young man's body, bruised and broken, but no trace of what had killed him. When the people of Bayou La Tour gathered to discuss the circumstances surrounding these two mysterious deaths, the Negroes and some others declared that an evil spirit haunted the gloomy fastness to the north of the settlement, while the more conservative agreed that some creature strange to those parts, some unknown beast, was ranging the night swamps, a creature that killed for the love of killing. Armed with shotgun and rifle, they hunted him. They set bear traps baited with an entire quarter of beef hung above, but no one ventured into the swamps after dark, until, one night, 10 of the best men in the settlement formed a party and rode out on horseback through the swamp road. Armed with pistol and sheath knife they rode, 2 by 2, knee to knee, their horses following each other nose to tail, so that if any one of the party were attacked, they all could turn and fight in a body. Nothing happened until they were on their way back. Then Walter Brandon, who, because he was one of their bravest, brought up the rear, grew careless and lagged behind. Suddenly, his horse came charging in among the others, riderless. They could find no trace of Walter, and the other 9 could only ride in and break the news to his young wife, who carried a baby at her breast. The next day, the girl's father, old Arne Horn, secured the services of a small, battered automobile and crossed 2 counties to see Ed Hardin and beg that he come and deliver them from this unknown beast that one by one was killing the menfolk of Bayou Latour. In his own county, Ed Hardin was a deputy sheriff, and the reputation of his prowess had travelled far. Each summer, when the fishing was best on the Sound, he came to Bayou Latour. Each winter he came to hunt wild turkeys in the swamps that surrounded the settlement. The people had grown to know him well, and they knew that he feared neither man, beast, nor the devil. He returned in the automobile with Arne, bringing with him his young friend Alex Rowe. When they reached Bayou Latour, the news awaited them that Walter's body, which bore on it the same marks as those others who had been killed, had been found floating on the waters of the bayou, and that it was being held at the water's edge so that Ed Hardin might see for himself the nature of death which this creature inflicted upon its victims. After he had seen, Ed Hardin came away alone, grim-mouthed. When he entered Arne's yard, it already was growing dark, the night breeze rustling in the live oaks overhead. He went to the barn and saddled Arne's bay mare. Having led her to the front fence, he tied her there and went into the house. In the hallway, which divided the house through the middle, he paused as he heard in the room beside him the low sobbing of a woman. Then he passed on to the room that had been assigned to him and Alex Rowe. A small kerosene lamp had been lighted and set upon the dresser, and in the light of this he was buckling on a belt holding a broad hunting knife and a pistol when Alex burst in upon him. "Ed Hardin," cried the young man, "what is that mare doing at the front of fence? Where be you going?" "I'm going to hunt that beast, Alex." "You ain't going to do that thing, Ed. You don't know what it is. How—" "I'm going, Alex." "But Ed, it's night. Wait till daylight. The last 2 times folks went out on the swamp road at night, there was a man killed." Broad-shouldered, sparely made, the big deputy drew himself up to his full height and turned to gaze for a moment at his young friend. "I'm going now," he said calmly.
"But Ed, you heard what they said about the schooner up in the bayou. It's been laying there for 2 weeks, out dealings with nobody. You heard what Rensie Bucker, us to be a sailor, said. He said he paddled up in his dugout by that schooner, and them folks on board is India folks. He says that in their land they's strange beasts and reptiles, and that maybe they've sought one of 'em loose in the swamp, maybe put it to watch the swamp road." "If it's been sought to watch the swamp road at night," said Ed, "that's just where I want to go. I want to meet it." "Wait, Ed, wait till I get hold of a horse. I'm going with you." A soft smile played for a moment about Ed Hardin's grim mouth. "No, Ed," he said, "I reckon I'll go by myself." As he was untying the mare, those who had returned to the house gathered about him, and, as Alex had done, tried to prevent him going off alone into the swamp at night. But he swung lightly to the saddle and galloped out through the settlement into the shadows of the giant cypress trees. The mare was a spirited and nervous animal, and she leapt and shied as she danced among the stagnant pools that lay black in the swamp road. In thus going out deliberately to use himself as a bait for the unknown beast, Ed felt that he could depend largely upon her agility and quickness to prevent being taken unawares by a sudden rush from the darkness. He drew from its holster his heavy Colt's revolver and thrust it through his belt in front, within convenient reach. So dark was the black tunnel of the road, and he could see no space in front of him, and he let the reins lie slack on the mare's neck, so that she might be undisturbed in picking her footing. And as he plunged deeper into the swamp, he experienced a lonely boding that was new to him. Time and again he had gone fearlessly out alone in the pursuit and capture of desperate men. Now, however, he did not know what the nature of the creature it was he sought, and he had to invite an attack from the darkness in order to get in touch with it.
The night was murky, almost sticky in its heaviness, and the swamp seemed strangely silent. Only the occasional call of some night bird pierced the stillness. He was familiar with the road, having travelled it frequently, and the places where violence had occurred had been described to him in detail. A few hundred yards to the left of the road where he now was riding, the fisherman had met his death. He passed the place where Brandon last had been seen, and soon after entered the deeper recess of the swamp where the herder had been snatched into the darkness of death. Plainly, this neighbourhood of violence was the creature's lurking place. Suddenly, the mare shied, snorted, and stood quivering, her head turned as though she saw or smelled something at the side of the road. He raised his pistol, which he now held ready cocked in his hand, and fired quickly into the darkness. As he had only one hand on the reins, it was some moments after the report before he could calm the startled animal sufficiently to proceed on his way. Twice more, at indications of terror from his horse, guided by her forward-pointed ears, Ed Hardin fired into the black shadows at the side of the road, the discharges making lurid flashes in the darkness.
The unknown beast evidently was near, following him through the brush or over the treetops. If it was on the ground, he hoped for the slender chance of killing or wounding it before it had an opportunity to attack. After each shot, as well as he could for the plunging of the mare, he listened intently for some cry of pain, some movement of the bushes, but the silence of the shadows was unbroken. The strain was nerve-wracking, and he had a wild desire to whirl the mare about and speed away in mad flight. He could not urge her out of a slow, hesitating walk, and she frequently shied from one side of the road to the other with those periodic halts of trembling fear. Then the road ran from beneath the arches of the swamp and passed over a corduroy crossing, bordered on each side by a dense growth of titi. The mare went more quietly now, and Ed began to hope that some of his shots had taken effect. He breathed more freely, now that the branches no longer drooped overhead. Presently, however, he found himself beneath spreading live oaks. These, flanking the road on either side, sent their giant limbs horizontally across. He peered from side to side, his eyes straining to penetrate the gloom, each indistinct tree trunk assuming a sinister outline. Overhead, the trees towered in cavernous depths, and suddenly, with a swish of leaves and branches, out of them dropped a great dark object. The frightened mare leaped forward, but the nameless creature alighted behind the saddle. Hardin snatched out his pistol, only to find that he was unable to use it, for he had been caught in a giant embrace that pinioned his arms to his sides, an embrace against which his own great strength was powerless. The mare ran desperately, her supple body close to the ground, her graceful neck outstretched. Out from the swamp she sped, crossing a reach of flat country once heavily covered with pines. The timber long since had been cut, only the stumps remaining, charred by forest fires, hordes of black ghosts crowding down to the edge of the road on both sides. It was a wild ride for the man, with death perched there behind. The great arms wound about him were slowly squeezing the breath from his body, and beneath that embrace he felt his ribs bend inward to the point of cracking. Desperately, he maintained his grip on the saddle with his knees. Then, just before consciousness would have left him, he raised his legs and flung himself sideways. The saddle slipped under the mare's belly. Carried by the momentum, but with that crushing grip never relaxing, the man and the terrible creature which held him hurtled through the air. They struck with a thud against a shattered stump at the side of the road, while the frightened mare sped on. The murderous creature was next the stump, and at the impact its hold on Ed Hardin loosened. Having slipped from the great arms, Ed flung himself over and rolled for several feet to one side. The pistol long since had dropped from his nerveless fingers, but he now quickly drew his hunting knife. Expecting an immediate attack with fang and claw, he lay on his back, his feet drawn up, very much in the position a cat assumes when defending itself. He knew it would be useless to pit his strength against that of the enormous creature, and the best he could hope for was to ward off an attack with his feet and watch for an opportunity to reach and drive home the knife. and suddenly it was looming there above him. For an instant it seemed to hesitate, then it backed slowly away. With a quick, halting motion, walking upright like a man, it began to circle about him. Its long arms swung below its knees. A round head was set on a neck so thick and short that it seemed to spring from the shoulders themselves. As it circled about him, Ed turned also, keeping his feet always presented. Again the creature backed off, up the road. Then it turned and walked slowly away. For a moment Ed Hardin lay watching it, unwilling to change his position. Then, tentatively, he raised himself to a sitting position. Suddenly, as if without looking, the creature divined his movement. It turned about at a distance of perhaps 50 feet, and then, with a strangely human shriek of rage, it rushed toward him. And it came through the gloom, this maddened creature, with its uncouth hopping run, swinging its long arms from side to side. The man dropped back into his former position, feet raised, arm held ready to strike with the knife. Before it reached him, it dropped forward without in the least pausing, and propelled by both arms and legs, shot in a great frog-like leap through the air. The shock as it landed upon him drove Ed Hardin's knees back against his chest. His right arm, held ready to strike with the knife, was pinned and twisted painfully. The knife slipped from his hand. A long arm shot forward, and talon-like fingers clutched his hair. With his legs doubled back as they were, once more he was seized in the giant embrace, and he felt that his knees were being pressed into his chest until it soon must crush in like a shattered eggshell. Then consciousness left him. When his senses slowly returned, he became aware of lights flashing and horses stamping and the sound of men's voices. Jonas Keel was speaking, and Ed had the rare experience of hearing himself discussed after he was thought to be dead. "Most on my bended knees to get him not to do it, but he said he wouldn't feel right to let death run loose unhindered, long as he was living and with strength to fight. And when he rid out single-handed and alone, the bravest man what ever drawed breath was kilt." From his position he judged that he had been placed on the grass at the side of the road. Near him was someone who, from an occasional quivering intake of breath, seemed to have been sobbing. He tried to turn and see who it was, and he found that he could not so much as twitch a finger. He heard 3 new arrivals come up the road, a man on horseback and 2 runners, the 2 evidently holding by the rider's stirrup leathers. The rider, as soon as he drew up, said, "We come soon's we heard you all was gone to foller Ed. Arn's bringing that wagon. It'll be here directly. We passed it a piece back, but Arn didn't get the straights from Si when he come out of the wagon what it kilt Ed. Poor old Ed." Old Renzi Bucker, the Negro who once had been a sailor, speaking with the patois of foreign birth, replied to him, "It is Jonas, the child-minded so-and-so, who was shanghaied from his mammy's shack down on the point 10 year back. He had the mind of a child and the strength of 5 men, with his big wide shoulders and short neck, with the hump on his back and his arms hanging most to his ankles. He was gentle in them days, but the East Indy folks took him off, and they brought him back a beast. He's from the schooner by his clothes, and they must have sought him on the swamp road at night to watch and kill. There he lies, dead. The stump gin which he stuck when he pulled Mr. Ed Hardin from his hoss had a sliver which stuck most through him. Then when he fit with Mr. Ed, the hurt must have killed him, because there is no other wound." The man beside Ed Hardin spoke, and Ed recognized him. "Alex," he said huskily. There was a cry of amazement. Alex called for a light. Someone else, evidently startled by the voice coming from what all had thought to be a dead man, started to run, kicked over a lantern, and was cursed roundly by the others who were crowding up. When the wagon arrived, he was so far recovered that with the assistance of the others, he was able to clamber painfully in and sink to the blankets on the bottom, every joint in his body aching.
that two Buntleys had called the younger men to one side, and they were whispering excitedly together. Presently the riding horses all were tied at the side of the road, and when the wagon creaked its way homeward, Ed was accompanied only by Alex, who had refused to leave him, and by old Arna. Renzi had gone with the others. 2 days later he was able to creep out to the front porch of Arna's little home and sit in the cool of a breeze that swept up from the bayou. After a space of silence he asked, "Arn, what them fellas do the other night? I can't get a peep out'n 'em. They found right smart of stuff in boxes, what Renzi said was some sort of dope, being unloaded from the schooner, but they throwed it in the water. I ain't entrusted in no dope, Arn. I say what they do. The leader of the gang confessed after he'd been questioned by Renzi, and when he saw the jig was up anyhow. They had sought Jonas to keep folks skeered off the swamp road at night by killing whosoever come there. They was going to get a truck and haul that stuff off somewhere. Well, what did the boys do?" Reflectively, Arna stroked his short, heavy beard. He spat into the yard. Then he turned to the deputy. "Ed," he said slowly, "you're comin' down here and single-handed and alone hunting out the critter what was killing us off will be remembered and talked about in generations to come, when these here swamps is cleared off and drained and producing corn and taters. But sich a little matter as a schooner lying at the bottom of the bayou gathering barnacles is soon forgot, and lets you and me forget that part of it too."
If you enjoyed this journey into the weird, please subscribe to the channel and select the bell icon to be notified when new entries are added to the vault. You can also find our archives on Apple Podcasts, Spotify and Amazon Music by following the links in the description below. As always, sleep well.